Welcome everyone to our third in a series of foster care and adoption virtual information sessions. Today we will be talking about youth in care who have experienced multiple moves and have difficulty forming healthy attachments. My name is Laura Williams, and I am the Program Supervisor for Foster Care and Adoption with Lutheran Family Services. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. John Murray is a founder, president, and CEO of Families First of Virginia, Incorporated. John has more than 30 years experience working with foster and adoptive children and families and has specialized training in neurofeedback, trauma-informed clinical intervention, neuroscience, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you letting me be here today.
We are very glad to have you with us. We have some questions for you to help our audience understand more about creating healthy attachments for youth who experience multiple moves. Can you share some of your experience working with foster and adoptive youth?
Okay. 30 years worth of experience. I've seen a lot of different experiences with children. I've seen children come from very traumatic backgrounds where fitting into a family setting was the most fearful thing they experienced. In their expression of their experience, often the move into care was more traumatic than their abuse history. I've had my first experience in foster care. My first child had 17 homes in 1 year before I had a chance to work with him. In total, he had 35 foster homes. I've seen children from all over Virginia, not just here in the Hampton Roads area, from many different backgrounds. I've worked with children who their family come from a very wealthy family, very prestigious, well-known families. I could use names that probably some people would know. I've seen children come from extreme poverty. A lot of different experiences, a lot of different types of needs were exposed with each one of those children. The last thing that I'll add to that is how remarkable it's been to see how resilient children can respond when in the right environment. I've been around a lot of different families. What's kept me here for 30 years, the families. It's inspiring every single day that I have a chance to work with a foster or adoptive parent. They come out of nowhere with a willingness to help children heal from those traumatic experiences.
Mm-hmm. What does trauma look like with some of these kids that you've worked with?
That's a great question, Laura. It's hard to say real specific because every child responds differently. If you just look at, I love talking about the brain, so hopefully I won't talk too much about that. But the brain itself, what you see, physical signs of abnormal development. I'm going to say abnormal expansion of something called the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that perceives threats. Actually, those children are born with bigger amygdalas even before they come out into the world. They're prepared for the worst case scenario. And so what do we see? We see children that have been stunted in some areas of their development and advanced in other areas. And most of how you see it is through the behavior. Children communicate through behavior. We all do, but especially in developing children. And we see children that are kind of stuck in these patterns of not being aware of their experiences or their emotional state, but just reacting to it. So it could be extreme behaviors. It could be that their behaviors are withdrawing, but more than likely it's a matter of fear that's expressed through the behavior.
Can you explain how removing a child from an abusive, neglectful home causes trauma?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look, let's go back to when mom's pregnant with the child before a child comes into care. Hearing starts at the 4th week of pregnancy, so attachments already started before they're born. And despite the fact that maybe they're born into a traumatic environment, they still have attachments. They still are connected. They are literally wired for mom and dad. And when they're removed from that causes a disruption. That disruption, despite what we might think is a unsafe, unstable, scary environment for a child to be raised in, they still have experienced some good experiences to where they feel connected with those people. So when you work with children, and I think I just said this earlier, often they'll express that the biggest traumatic experience they had was the removal. And it's never, and you know this, Laura, it's never a peaceful transition. It's never like we have a nice little family meeting and we make a collective decision together and it's a nice handoff to another family. It's literally ripped out of mom's arms or ripped out of grandmother's arms or grandfather, or whomever's raising them. And that environment in itself often uses the police and other officials in there taking those children to a strange environment. And that in itself puts those children in a state of shock, and it interferes with their normal ability to process information at that point.
We know that kids are traumatized when they are abused and neglected, and they are further traumatized when they're removed from their home. Can you explain how living in multiple foster homes can also make the trauma worse?
Great question. In answering that question, I'd like for everybody to think about this. Each time a child experiences something negative, in developing children's brains, for most children, they don't have the concept that it isn't something that they created. Especially victims of trauma are often blamed for parents or caretakers' behavior. And so each time something negative happens, they believe it's their fault. And so as a child's placed in a foster home and then moved to another foster home, which typically, and you know the stats better than I do, Laura, the average child moves 3 times in a year. That's in foster care in general across the United States. Each time they move, it reinforces that it is their fault for the negative experiences and the abuse and neglect that they've gone through. So we're doing this over and over and over again, and it's causing a disruption in their ability to think normally, to process information normally, and it's reinforcing that they are not capable of having an attachment with a caregiver or a family. The only way a child can heal its trauma history is in a family setting. It cannot happen in a facility. It cannot just happen in a therapy session. It has to be in a family setting. But yet here we're putting children in the correct environment, which is a family setting, but we're having children move from home to home to home, and we're reinforcing this thought processes that children have constantly.
We have a question through our Q&A. What can a family do to help a child not to blame themselves?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, be careful how you express a directive about children's behaviors and how we talk about labeling. First of all, we don't give labels to children. We don't say you're bad because you did this. We don't give directives in regards to that. We got to make sure that our communication is not a blaming process. The number one way of helping with this problem is to see your role as a soother. That a caregiver is about soothing children and through their experiences. It's not pointing out what they did wrong, but to soothe them through those experiences, not blaming them for their behavior. You can hold them accountable, but that blaming component just makes it 10 times worse for their ability to see it differently.
Can you give any examples of how you might do that?
Oh, sure.
I think sometimes families get stuck in that blaming piece because they don't also want to feel like it's their fault.
Okay.
Do you have any examples of that?
Sure. Let's say a child is being getting placed in a new foster home. How do you introduce them into that environment, first of all? Do you give them a chance to get acclimated to that environment? Do you put big parameters on expectations? Or is it your job to have a consistent soothing process? There's a technique that was taught by Brian Post a long time ago. It's called 10-20-10. And when everybody hears me speak, I'm going to bring this up every single time because it works. You use 10 minutes in the morning to create a relationship with the child, asking nothing from them. We do this as babies all the time, but for children coming into care, 10 minutes. We don't ask questions. We just spend time present with them. So that could be like, say, for example, eating breakfast with them for 10 minutes in the morning, sitting as close as possible where you're comfortable and they're comfortable. The parent not talking. And that's a big problem for a lot of parents. They want to talk. They want to get them prepared for the day. But 10 minutes of asking nothing but being in relationship side by side. Then 20 minutes when they get home from school. Well, that's kind of a weird scenario right now because people aren't in school, but 20 minutes later in the day where you're providing the same type of relationship, that you're present, that let's say you're eating again together for lunch or for a late afternoon snack. And while they're feeling soothed, you stay in relationship and you're not asking open questions. You're just present. If they want to ask questions and talk, that's fine, but I don't want stimulus. I don't want computer time. I don't want TV time. I don't want any distractions. And then 10 minutes before they go to bed, same thing. You literally, I don't care how old the child is, you literally put them to bed. If they're 18, you don't have to tuck them in, but you can be present with them. Again, not asking anything, just hanging out with them, being present and calm and being connected at the same time. That's 40 minutes in a day. If you think about right now, most parents don't spend 40 minutes with children one-on-one like that today. I know that might be different during this pandemic, and that's why a lot of families are struggling right now. But 40 minutes in relationship, asking nothing from them, being soothing, after 18 months of just that one technique, you could rewire the brain and how it responds to relationships, allowing them to feel close and to feel supported in an attachment with a caregiver.
All right, thank you. What does a parent need to know about parenting a youth who comes into my home from another family?
Okay, I'm gonna say a weird statement. The first thing is what you see with your eyes, not true. What I mean by that is, like, when you hear a baby crying, you don't hold the baby accountable for their crying. You figure out what their needs are and you go through a series of questions, internal questions. Are they hungry? Are they sick? Are they wet? Do they need to be held? You ask those kind of questions. And so automatically, we don't really need to do any training on that part. That's instinctual for most adults. The problem with that is that we stop doing that. Like, we don't do it anymore. So for a child adjusting to your home, a child comes to your home, Laura, it would be your job to see them in the same light. So if they're struggling through their behavior or if they're isolating to themselves, it isn't a message that they don't want to be with you. It isn't a message that they don't respect you, by the way. And that's a big problem with, if you give birth to a child, you have 9 months before they're even born to be attached. In foster care or adoption, I bring you a child and automatically has to start right away. So you're behind the ball already. So the ability to be present and connect with a child, asking very little from them and going deeper past what you see would be the number one strategy to start with in that adjustment process. Thinking your role is to soothe and connect in your interactions with them.
Thank you. I just want to remind folks that we have the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen if anybody has any additional questions. And the next question for you, John. Can you explain how kids express their feelings through behaviors?
They act out what they feel. They struggle with, if you have a trauma history, or just in developing children, most children develop as they progress. The first part of development for a newborn is something in the back of the brain called the amygdala that's fully formed by 36 months. And so that ability works very well. It expresses the alarm system and they respond to that through adrenaline and cortisol. So it's not a matter of them thinking through it, they just react to their emotional state. If you ask a child who has a trauma history, how do they feel? What's the number one answer you're always going to get? I don't know. It's because they're disconnected. It's not a matter they don't know. They don't have the ability to get information to hear to where they can express it normally. So how are they going to express that? As through their behavior. And I'll go back to the same statement. It's your job to interpret what the need is. So you could start with survival needs first. That's food, clothing, shelter, and safety. If you see negative behavior, you have to say, is it about food? Is it about clothing? Is it about shelter? Is it about safety? In foster care and adoption, the two we always highlight is safety and shelter. Safety because they've lived in dangerous environments and that alarm system's constantly believing it's not safe. And shelter, there's little guarantee that they're going to stay, especially in foster care. They're aware. If they're over the age of, let's say, 4 or 5 years old, they're aware they can move quickly. And we go back to the stats before, they probably already moved. So they know that's a potential problem out there. So you have to be constantly showing them that they are safe and they can stay. That's what those expressions or feelings are about. It's a test. Can I stay when I show you my emotional state? Can I stay if I can show you how troubled I am inside? Will you accept me where I am? Will you accept my developmental stage? I'm 14, but my emotional state's 3. Can you accept that? Are you willing to work past my mistakes and my inability to be connected at the same time? Those 2 areas, that safety, and then we move on to psychological, and there are 5 of those. And we start with freedom. Everybody has to have some sense of freedom. We move on to recognition. Everybody has to be recognized for something. Doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative. You still have to be recognized. We have to have some sense of power. We have to have some control. We have to have some sense of belonging and some sense of enjoyment. So if you went through the survival needs first and you can't really figure it out, then you could jump forward to the psychological needs and just start to ask those internal questions. How do I make a child feel powerful? How do I make a child feel like they belong? And those are the things that literally parents should be doing. Literally go in their bedroom, close the door, and start writing a plan how they're going to meet those needs consistently. Last thing I'll say, Laura, about this. It's a 5-to-1 ratio. For every 1 negative behavior that gets your needs met, you need 5 sources of positive ways of getting your needs met to overpower this one's negative. So if I get power by being disrespectful, I literally have to have 5 new sources of power in the home to where I don't need to be disrespectful anymore to get my needs met.
That's pretty interesting. When you were talking before about the soothing piece, we had a question that came up in the Q&A. Can you give some ideas of what a soothing activity might be? Because that may even help with what you were just talking about as well.
Start with food first. It's the easiest one. Find out what they like to eat, and we're all like this too, especially right now. Everybody's in the house and they're looking for food to soothe them too, because this is a stressful time for all of us. That's the easiest part. Some people freak out about junk food or unhealthy food. Start where you can. Doesn't really matter that much. You can progress towards getting more healthy later on, but start where you can, making sure that resource is always available and making sure that in times of them getting something pleasurable to eat, that you are present. Try to avoid going in the room and having that food. Most people are going to freak out then because they're worried about bugs and all kinds of stuff. But being present while eating helps form the attachment. Go back to babies. When mom is breastfeeding or bottle feeding the child, what's happening during that process? It's forming attachment. It creates a connection. It also creates these positive feedback loops in the hippocampus in the brain that creates the attachment itself. So start with food. Other ways, create some guarantees in the house. What I mean by guarantees of positive things that are going to happen no matter what. Like, for example, movie night. Friday night's movie night. Doesn't matter what the week looked like. Doesn't matter how negative children acted that week. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It's a guarantee. And if they know those guarantees are coming, and it's not based on the being good kind of method, that brain will settle down and they will feel safer and more connected in your home.
Okay. How can we maybe learn more about the psychological needs of a child we might have?
It's guesswork. I hate to put it this way, but it's guesswork. You literally have to sit down and think about each one of those needs. Like, for example, I always kind of start with that power issue, because power issues start for 2-year-olds. We all know this. Once they learn they can get away from you, once they learn the word no, it's very powerful. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel independent. So how do you make a child feel powerful? You have to experiment in the home with each one of these by making sure that you're writing down 5 sources of it. So you literally go in the room, you take each one, power. How am I going to make them feel powerful in the home? 5 different ways. Then you move to belonging, 5 different ways. And just experiment with each one of those one by one. Take a week for each. Like, so 1 week on power, 1 week on belonging, 1 week on freedom. Each one of those, we go down the list and we figure out, is the resources that we're trying to provide in the home, is it a good fit for what they're looking for? And I think you'll find it, once you start experimenting with that, you'll see success pretty quickly on that.
It's trial and error, like with so many other things with parenting, and just
Exactly.
sticking with it and working through it.
I wish it was like step 1 through 10 and then we're golden, but it's not that way with people, and it's sure not that way with a developing child's brain.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about how children express their trauma at different ages?
Yeah, that's kind of a trick question. And why I say that's a trick question is because you could have, for younger children, let's start there first. Okay, for young children, we are pretty accepting that they express their, I would use the word dysregulation, that their feelings have gotten to a point where they're starting to express those in a point where they're just a little bit out of control. We're not quite at a tantrum yet, but we're starting to see that they're starting to get hyped up and a little overwhelmed a little bit. If we start soothing right then and we see a response, of course, we've got the problem solved, but we don't really freak out too much with a tantrum for a 2-year-old. We know it's coming. We don't like it, but we don't really, we can become accepting about it. We might be embarrassed if it's out in public, but it's not the end of the world. Why I say this is a trick question is because I could have a 16-year-old who is had life experiences like a 25-year-old adult, socially is more like a 30-year-old adult, is brilliant academically, but emotionally she's still 3 years old. And so that behavior could resort and regress back to what a 3-year-old's doing, and we freak out. We're not sure why she's responding this way. In fact, we start blaming her and we say, okay, you're 16, why are you acting like a 3-year-old? Get yourself together, kind of thing. Like, we think a statement catches them up, when in fact, when they regress back to the 3-year-old behavior at an emotional state and you comfort them, then that starts the healing process for them to start to catch up emotionally. So how we see that in children is all over the place. I have a great story. I'll try to be quick. I had a foster parent say, hey, John, go in my room and sit on the edge of my bed. I said, what are you talking about? And I sat on the edge of the bed like this. And across from it was a dresser with a mirror. She says, you see that mirror? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, look in the left-hand corner and you see a picture of your boy. The child was on my caseload. And I saw his face, his head had been cut off and glued on a baby's body, crawling like this, right? And she's yelling from the other room, now why'd I do that? I said, I don't know. And she says, now come back in here. And I walk back in there, she says, that's him. That's what I'm dealing with. I have a child in my home who is 14 years old, and I see his 14-year-old face, but it's on the baby's body because I'm trying to keep myself trained for who I need to be present for. It was like a brilliant technique. This woman was unbelievable. And she taught me about how you have to make those adjustments for what you typically think you're supposed to expect from a 14-year-old back down to a baby. And she says to me, she says, John, your boy's going to get fat in my house. I said, what? She said, yeah, I'm going to fatten him up. I'm going to put him on a feeding schedule like a 3-year-old. So sure enough, she says, first of all, I'm going to lay some heavy carbs on his stomach so he sleeps through the night. I'm going to constantly be feeding him so he feels comfortable in my home, and he's going to form a better relationship with me. And this was not far from Christmas. So she says, go in there and look under the Christmas tree, and you're going to see 3 big boxes, and they'll be wrapped, and you won't see any names on them. It's okay. She says, now guess who they're for? I said, well, I guess the young man we're talking about. She says, yeah. She says, they're baby toys. They're literally baby toys. They're like, Laura, you go in the doctor's office, you get a little block of wood with the wire, it goes like this, a little bead, you move around like that. That was his, and a little table with chairs and some blocks. This kid's 14. She says, Christmas morning, I'm going to ask for him to open those up because I'm not sure who they're for, and I didn't put a label on, and I'm going to leave them in the corner. Guess what's going to happen? I said, I guess it's going to play with it. She says, come back the following day after Christmas, which I did. Who's sitting in the corner playing with those toys? By this time, he's 15. 15-year-old male. Help him express his emotional state, even though he's 15, like a younger child, and it was soothing and helped him catch up. Hope that wasn't too long for you. Because I can remember. You have to keep in touch.
I know. I know you have some stories. So let me just ask, so she was successful with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. She took a child that was, had been in residential on and off in his life, had extreme sexualized, not sexualized behavior, but extreme sexual abuse that he experienced from his father, a very sick kid. This was the last place that we were going to try. And he stayed there 4 years and graduated from high school, which was a miracle. This was a kid that was going to an institution and probably staying there. Despite the fact he had IQ in the genius category, he was a very sick kid. And she really helped him catch up emotionally in his development.
Very good.
Great success story.
Very good. So sometimes though, despite our best efforts, children do need to change to a different family. Can you describe a little bit about why that needs to happen sometimes, and how often does it occur?
Okay. Again, I said earlier, it's 3 times typically in a year. That's the average foster care placement. Let's hope that's not an average that people experience that are from the child's point or the parent's point. But why? Why would we move? Why are these multiple moves happen? There's multiple reasons. The first reason I'd start with is, has the parent screened out who's not appropriate for them before accepting children? Like, have they really, when they're going through training, they're thinking about adoption, thinking about foster care, have they really thought about that? You don't have that ability when you give birth to someone. You don't screen out the child that you give birth to because it's your child. You have to accept them. This is different. And so you have an ability to start with a better percentage of success if you've really looked at, 1, your history and what you're looking for, and 2, your limitations. And we all have limitations. Training and development of foster and adoptive parents is not about making them better, but it's making them more aware. It's not like I'm going to make you a better parent. It's whether I'm going to make you more aware of what you're experiencing and how you communicate. That's the more important thing. So we're going to start with, have you screened out? Have you really thought about what's the natural fit best that we can get close to that? Other reasons, main reason we move children is because of safety reasons. Either the child is acting in an unsafe manner and cannot be maintained in that environment. It would need a higher level of care, which that is a very small percentages, by the way. But the main reason is the parent can't meet the needs of the child in their home. Like, they don't have the window of tolerance of stress to deal with meeting the children's needs. Now, that does expand over time, by the way. As parents get experience, we do see that window of tolerance expand if they're getting proper support. But it's a matter of the fact that the child cannot have their needs met in that home and maybe need a different match for another family. The last thing I'll say about that is, there's no perfect science to this. It's not like you went through the training and checked off every box and you did everything perfect, so the right child's going to come just for you and there won't be a struggle. Sometimes parents don't see the light at the end of the tunnel and don't feel connected. If you ask me what I think the number one reason is why we move children, the parent is not attached to the child. The attachment's not strong enough to withstand the behaviors that maybe the child's experiencing. It works the other way too. If the child doesn't attached to the family at some point, and we maybe have to look at a different alternative of placement. It's an educated guess, but it's still a guess whether it's the right fit or not, unfortunately.
And you've talked about this a little bit, but can you think of some strategies that might help a child stay in a foster home, and how we can try to encourage families to continue working with a child even though it might not be going so well in the moment?
You bet. Future-oriented techniques. Here's a real simple one. Get a big calendar. I don't know, I'm old, so I'm gonna say, those big giant calendars people used to have in their house all the time. Have it somewhere displayed in your house, and have the calendar well organized, what the child can expect for the week, and let them be your reminder. Like, be old school, like, I don't have my glasses. Can you go over there and read what we got going on tomorrow, or what we have going on Friday? And there should be some future-oriented experiences that are positive, that are written down, not just appointments, but the things. Go back to the movie night. Go back to, I had a family that every Saturday, each child, it would rotate, each child from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m., they were the boss of the home. I don't care if they were 3, I don't care if they were 5, I don't care if they were 15, 18, whatever. They were able to control what the family was doing during that time. They were in charge. They were actually given a budget and created events that they could do that they found enjoyable, and they were in charge, and they felt that they had more control in the relationship. That seemed to make a big difference because it gave them a great sense of power and belonging at the same time, made them feel safe. I'm back to those needs again, right? But that future-oriented processing that sometimes parents just kind of drop on children. If you have a child that has a healthy attachment and normal development, they can handle those surprises pretty well. Not great, but pretty well. For children with trauma histories, they can't handle that. They don't know what to expect. It's kind of going back to in treatment of children with emotional needs. You could put a child in a facility, let's say a group home, for example, and the first 30 days for males, they get better, dramatically better, by the way. But after 30 days, they level off and they decrease in their progress, and they actually end up leaving typically that group home in worse shape than when they came in, because it might be consistent, but it's not a guarantee. People go home. It's not a guarantee of relationships. And so back to strategy. So I'm talking future-oriented, and it's guarantees of certain things. And then the other strategy should be, you stay in relationship no matter what. You can't be a yeller and screamer type parent. You can't be just a directive parent. You can't be a keeping it real and being blunt and just dropping things on and confronting children. The best technique you can use is you connect before you correct. And most people have that backwards. We correct behavior, and then maybe we'll try to go back and connect later. Doesn't work well for these children. In fact, it causes the same mechanisms for that alarm system to go off. These children are so fragile that when you come home and you're in a bad mood and you don't express that bad mood and say it's something you experienced, they think it's about them. They think their bad grades will cost them their home. They think the fact that they lost it, got in a fight, or had an argument with somebody, a teacher or something, got a phone call, that's it, I gotta move again. And you need to be very careful in how you express your responses to that. It should be correction first with empathy, like, I know you had a tough day today. Let's go get something to eat. Don't go straight into the problem. Most families that I work with, they're very comfortable with confronting issues. I don't mean in a bad way, but they're just very bold and blunt about things. These children don't respond well to that. You need to be able to connect first. That should be your strategy. You should spend, like back to the 10-20-10, you have different segments of the day that you're constantly connecting with those children, and they're guaranteed no matter what, like the baby gets.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we don't have any other Q&A questions coming up. So Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? Anything that we missed today that you think would have been important for us to hear about?
Yeah, there's a couple more things. There's something called positive reframe, which a positive reframe is you find the positive intention behind the negative behavior. And I'll give you an example, like lying. One of the number one reasons children move from home to home, lying. If a parent has a hard time connecting with somebody, they can't trust them. I need for parents to look at lying differently. And I don't care what age we're talking about. Let's find out positive intention behind lying. And what would that be? Like, what's the good thing about lying? If you really sat back and thought about it, they don't want to be in trouble. That's the reason they're lying. They don't want to disappoint you or upset you. That's actually a sign they're starting to feel connected to you. The child that's extremely disconnected is the child that doesn't lie and is bold in your face and says, okay, what are you going to do about it? We can still work with that child, but that's a little more challenging. The child that's lying wants the connection. That's why they're lying, by the way. So if we look at the positive intention, respond and say, I can see you really don't want to be in trouble today. And he hopefully says yes, or maybe he doesn't say anything, and then you drop it. Like you don't go into getting that confession so you feel closer, but you wait. You actually go at their pace, and then you distract them with an activity and don't go after that behavior. Like if your focus becomes about behavior, it's going to be harder to connect with these children. But lying itself is actually a good sign, not a bad sign. And I know culturally and morally and ethically people struggle with that, but for these children, it's different. You didn't have the opportunity to build that over time, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's actually your job to look at the positive, even when you're looking at negative. So I would say that technique is a tough technique, but you really need to spend time thinking about what are some positive things about this child's negative behavior. What are they really trying to get met? That goes back to the earlier conversation, like, is this about food, clothing, shelter, safety? Is this about survival skills, psychological skills of belonging? A lot of lying is about belonging. A lot of children are lying because they feel connected with their biological family, and their attempts of their lying is to stay connected with them and not be connected with you as they grieve the loss of their family. The last thing I'll say, technique-wise, when you're looking at negative behavior or acting out behavior, you have to look past that behavior. It cannot be that simple. I said earlier in the first part of our conversation, what you see with your eyes is not true. When children act out, I don't need to teach anything about when children are not acting out. You're going to do fine. There's no problem with that. But when children are acting out, that acting out behavior, you have to look through that and look at the true emotional state and go back. Here's what's brilliant about fostering or adopting children with trauma history. You get a chance to go back in time and heal that trauma if you accept them emotionally where they are, and that becomes your soothing start place. Like you go back. Like I have some parents that they're literally holding a 12-year-old and rocking them to soothe them through their emotional state, as long as they feel safe with that process. And we talked about that a little bit, depending on their history. But you're literally sitting there rocking a 12-year-old to get them in that same emotional state. Last thing, I said two, but now I added another one. It's the amount of time that you spend with children that's most important. It is not about the quality of time. People say, I need great quality of time. No. You need exposure of time as much possible, as long as my parents or your parents or the caregivers are in good emotional state, and expose that child to believe it's possible. My child that was in 17 homes in 1 year, I put him in a home last 6 months. He goes to the next home. At 2 years, he's riding in my car. He turns the radio down. He goes, John, it could have been like this all the time. I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, you heard me. It could have been like this all the time. There are people like this. They're not faking. I said, yeah. He said, I had no idea. It took this long, 2 years, for it to register in his brain of these parents doing similar things we're talking about for it really to click for him. That might not take your child 2 years, might take them a month, it might take them 6 months. There's no guarantee. But the exposure of the amount of time that you want to be around them, and you can show them they can be loved without the abuse. They will heal. They will connect. They will make progress. I've seen it for 30 years.
Are there any books or resources that you might recommend for us?
A couple. One, I would ask for you to go online and look up several people. One would be Brian Post. And he has something called the Post Institute. It's a website. Two, Dan Siegel talks about mindfulness and being present and staying in a relationship. He has multiple books. There's another website, Dr. Amen, who will literally show you different brain scans and what children's brains look like that have trauma history. And then there's Dr. Bruce Perry. He has a lot of different information. Most recently, he was on Oprah talking about the importance of connecting before you correct behavior. He also makes a really cool statement. He says, it's not about what's wrong with someone, it's about what happened to them. It's a beautiful statement if you think about it, and put your mindset where it needs to be. He has a lot of different books. One of them is a book called A Boy Raised by Dogs. I would recommend that book also.
Write that. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today, John. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And Laura, thank you. I know you've been doing this a long time, and for anybody involved in this, you're a godsend to anybody who's doing this. You should be proud of this. It's very important, especially today, and I'm humbled to be around anybody who's involved in this. So
thank you. Thank you. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up today's event. I'd like to thank you for attending this event in our Foster Care and Adoption Virtual Information Series, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.